And I want to echo what everybody has said. It's really wonderful to be here and see this sea of faces and to be part of such a great shortlist of authors. It's really very moving. So my book is a bit different from the other books on the list. It's a memoir about living with addiction in the family. So I'm trying to find the words in the book to describe a series of events that were extremely painful for me and also for my family. It's not a medical book as such. It offers questions rather than answers, but it is a book about a medical condition. I began to write it after my sister-in-law, Eva Rausing, was found dead from a drug overdose in the house that she shared with her husband, my brother. She'd been hidden in that room for 2 months. Both she and my brother were drug addicts. And so I began writing the book in a state of really acute shock and grief, and also a kind of not knowing. We didn't know anything at the time of what had happened or what was unraveling. I was trying to make sense of something that really was kind of incomprehensible, which is something to do with the boundary between life and death and what happens to a body in a room and what happens to somebody when all the people who are there, all the officials from the community who are there to look after us when somebody dies and look after the body and take care of everything, when those people are not there and you're trying to deal with everything yourself, almost like a child. And this is what happened. It was a terrifying drug story. You know, you had on the one hand an overdose. On the other hand, you had somebody who was so deep in his addiction that he really was not able to do anything, contact anyone. A case of extreme reclusiveness. So after the initial shock, I was gripped by a need to know what exactly had happened. And it was almost like a craving. I was drawing up timelines. I was trying to figure out exactly what had happened, who saw Eva last, how exactly did it happen. As a consequence of that, I became fascinated by addiction itself and understanding what this strange emotional disorder really is. I've come to the conclusion that addiction really is in all of us. It's so much a spectrum disorder that it is something that we can all understand. It's the human hunger for emotional satisfaction and for more and more and more. The human hunger and the human indifference. It's the primate in us, and that emotional bandwidth that all primates have between gentleness, tenderness, extreme violence, between compassion and indifference, between something so hedonistic and also so self-sacrificing. The book was written in English, and this winter I spent some time rewriting the translation into Swedish. So it was translated by a professional translator. Not obviously into my voice. So I rewrote the translation from beginning to end. And it was such an interesting exercise because only then really did I begin to feel like I understood the structure of the book and I understood what I'd kind of unconsciously done with the book. So I go towards, in the book, in the text, I go towards this very dark center and then I veer away. So the text has become very associative. It's you know, when I go closer to the very painful events, I think of other things essentially. So in that sense, it's quite a psychoanalytic text, just in the sense that psychoanalysis works by association. But what I also understood when I was working on the translation was that the book is partly about what happened, but it's also about childhood memories. And I began to see that those childhood memories in the book had a very drowsy, almost narcotic quality to them. And so that there was almost a kind of sense in which the text itself became a kind of siren song, bringing me away from the pain that I was trying to describe and the very harrowing events that we were living with. So I thought that I was writing my book in order to understand, but actually I think, now in retrospect when I look back on it, I think that I was writing the book in order not to understand. I was writing the book in order to create a set of palatable memories, memories that I could live with, and a sense of a painful story, yes, but a painful story that I was able to tell, So there's a lot that happened that is not in the book. I also began to understand that my craving, my desire, my need to write it down had to do with the pain. And the analogy that I was thinking of was that of having a fish hook in your finger. You have a fish hook in your finger and you have to push it through in order to get it out. You have to push through the pain. I was bringing my reflections into the public realm, partly because the story was already so public. Here, even more so in Sweden, where there was also an opera about what had happened, that tried and inevitably, of course, from my point of view, failed to capture the story. Because the authors of the libretto and the media really didn't know anything about it. So the story was always attached to very judgmental cliches about wealth, about consumption, about inheritance, about addiction, about a certain kind of hollowing out, a kind of doom that descends on families. I want to say something about guilt. If you read the book, you will see that there's a lot of guilt in the book. Some people have been disturbed by that spectre. I describe early on why the title Mayhem. Now, mayhem is an old English term for maiming. So if I cut off somebody's arm, I'm guilty of mayhem. It's a very apt term for a book on addiction, because addiction brings a certain kind of psychic maiming. So your emotions, in a sense, are maimed, both the emotions of the addict, who can't really feel anything much, but also my concern was really about what happens to family members of addiction. So happiness, of course, is gone, but also peace of mind, security, stability, and curiosity. And even good emotions, if you have addiction in the family, even good emotions can turn bad. Hope sucks you into the vortex of obsession. You hope for recovery, of course, and that hope can keep you in the obsession. Love can turn you into an enabler. The wish to help can turn you into an intolerable presence to the addict. So you can place all your good intentions on the table, and to the addict, your attempted interventions will become toxic one way or another. People said to me so often, "Why are you so hard on yourself?" As though this was not a book, a text with its own logic and meaning, and a deliberate attempt to find a language for that guilt and for the emotions. My guilt, all of our guilt, is a symptom of the condition of what it means to live with addiction, and I wanted to write honestly about that. The guilt hinges on so many ways in which we think that we try to help, but we don't. How to help is denounced as oppressive, as wrong, as bad. So my book was really an attempt to make sense of all of that. Somebody said, I did the right thing, and I was left with the wrong feelings. And the right thing was looking after Hans and Eva's children, who were in our care for 10 years. The wrong feeling was too much guilt and not enough anger. But that, of course, is a symptom. It's a symptom of the condition, of the syndrome. I wanted also to write about the desperate attempts to control, about trying to keep it all together, about my own expressions of control, my thrift. Addiction is a state of extreme disorder, and it's easy for family members to create a kind of opposite state, unconsciously a kind of state of frozen order as a defense against the disorder. So this book is a memoir. It is a form of narrative nonfiction. I want to just say that, emphasize that I'm a character in the book. My husband Eric is a character in the book. My brother is a character defined by absence and silence. Eva's character was defined by anger and repeated tragic attempts to connect. Eric's character stands outside this insane world that we had created. And his common sense in the book, his sanity, throws light on my own obsession. Karen Blixen said that all sorrows can be born if you put them into a story or tell a story about them. That was certainly true for me too. Writing it also made me see that I had become a collection of identifiable symptoms. I was the symptoms that I was trying to describe in the book. And translating it, as I said, made me see that the book itself, the attempt to understand addiction as a family disease, was also a representation of the very disease that it was trying to describe. That sounds like a game, but I just want us all to remember how high the stakes are. Thousands of people dying, hundreds of thousands, millions globally every year, prematurely, not only from overdoses, but also, in fact, I think mainly from neglect, from violence. Few of the people who survive them can ever find the words to tell their stories. And my book was really an attempt to do that and try and speak on behalf of all the families out there who so often, especially parents, are implicitly blamed in some way or another. And really, we know now through science that this is a largely inherited disease. It's a social disease and it's a psychological disease. But the psychology, the early childhood experiences, is only a small part of this. Thank you very much.